Hey everyone, I really messed up, and now I've lost the only man I ever truly loved because of my own selfish desires. The worst part isn't just that I hurt him, but that he left me. I hate that he walked away instead of staying to work things out. I wish he had called me out, corrected me, and stuck around while I tried to fix my mistakes. Now I'm left disappointed, not just in the choices I made, but in how everything ended. I had a friend, a loving partner, a husband who was a gem, and I threw it all away for a meaningless fling. I was 19 when I met him, and he was 21. We met at the library. Before him, I had never been in a relationship. I hadn't even been on a date. I kept to myself, focused on getting my degree. I didn't want to get distracted by anything or anyone. He was the one who first approached me. He said he'd seen me around and thought I was beautiful. Then, he asked for my number. I turned him down immediately. I didn't want to know anyone. I just wanted to keep my head down and breeze through school. For months, he would come over and sit with my friends at our usual table in the library. Sometimes, he brought a novel to read, other times, he just engaged in conversations. I got used to seeing him every day. I started noticing how he would steal glances at me while I read. And, honestly, I started looking forward to those glances. Then, one day, he didn't show up. I asked my friends if they knew where he was, but no one had an answer. One friend bluntly said, "His life doesn't revolve around you. Maybe he got tired of waiting." Her words hit harder than I expected, and it wasn't until later that I realized why. I was falling for him, and the idea that he might have moved on hurt more than I wanted to admit. When he didn't show up the next day either, I started asking if any of my friends had his number. Maybe he was sick or in the hospital. But none of them did because I had specifically asked them not to. On the third day, he returned. He walked in with his friends, but immediately made his way to the bookshelves. That day, for the first time, I paid attention to what book he picked up, a textbook for a class called SE 301. I even asked him, "Where were you? I didn't see you for 2 days." He smiled and responded sarcastically, "Oh, she speaks." Everyone at the table laughed. But I was serious. I had started to worry. I looked him directly in the eyes for the first time. He stared back, looking both surprised and amused. It was in that moment I realized how handsome he truly was. He wasn't tall or muscular, just average in build. But those blue eyes. I could get lost in them. And even though he was just 5'9", he had a presence that made him feel larger than life. He teased me, saying, "I doubt you even know my name." My friends laughed again, and I blurted out, "Stanley." But he just shook his head and corrected me, explaining that his name was actually Stan Lee, like the famous Marvel creator. He walked away after that, sitting at another table by himself. For the first time, I felt bad. I had hurt him, and I didn't even know his real name. I couldn't concentrate on my books after that. My friend noticed and urged me to go talk to him. After hesitating for what felt like hours, I finally gave in and approached him. I awkwardly apologized, to which he responded with a smirk, calling it the cutest anime apology he'd ever heard. We talked, and he explained that he wasn't mad, just preparing for an upcoming test. I asked him what his real name was, and with a smile, he introduced himself as Daniel. Looking back now, I realize I never deserved him. I should have done things differently, but I didn't. Instead, I let my selfishness take over and lost him forever. We went on a date the very next day, and I was head over heels. But that was just the beginning of my journey to destroy what could have been the best relationship of my life. Our first date was perfect. Daniel was funny, charming, and had a lot of interesting things to say. I loved how people looked at us with envy when we walked together. He told me during the date that he was the runner-up for Mr. UCLA, and I wasn't surprised. There were few guys who could match his looks or personality. I felt proud to be on his arm. Our relationship grew quickly after that. While we were at UCLA, we became something of a power couple. Everywhere we went, people took notice, but honestly, most of that attention was because of him, not me. I was his first everything, his first date, his first kiss, his first love. And, of course, he was mine. But here's the thing, I wasn't satisfied with that. He was always patient with me, always kind, but I let something toxic grow inside me. I started to feel resentful that I only had him on my list. He had been with other women before me, and I felt like I was missing out, like I wasn't enough. It was a stupid, immature mindset, but I couldn't shake it. After we got married, that feeling only got worse. We had been together for 5 years before tying the knot, and by the 3rd year, my thoughts were already straying. I wanted to experience more, to be with other men. And the worst part? I convinced myself that it was reasonable to want that. I brought up the idea of opening our marriage to Daniel not long after we got married. The way he shut it down, though, it should have been enough to make me drop the idea completely. He said if I ever acted on it, he would leave. No questions asked, he told me. At the time, I was mad. I felt like he was being unfair, like he was trying to control me. How dare he refuse me when he had already lived his life before me? That's when I decided to wait. I told myself I'd bring it up again after we were married, and he would have no choice but to see things my way. I thought that once we were tied down, he'd have to accept it. Looking back now, I realize how manipulative and selfish I was. I wasn't thinking about Daniel at all. I only thought about what I wanted, what I felt I deserved. And that's what eventually destroyed us. After we got married, I asked him again. I told him I wanted to explore other people, that it wasn't fair he had all this experience while I had none. I wanted to be worshipped by men the way he had worshipped other women before me. I'll never forget the way he looked at me when I told him we were opening the marriage, whether he liked it or not. Those words still haunt me. He was the only man who had ever loved me unconditionally, and I repaid him by throwing his love in his face. When I told Daniel we were opening the marriage, I could see the pain in his eyes, but he didn't argue. He just sat there, staring at me, like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. After what felt like forever, he finally spoke, his voice quiet and broken. "Well, you made your decision, so I guess that's that." Then he got up and walked away. Just like that. I remember asking him, "What was it you wanted to tell me?" He paused at the doorway, his back to me, and said, "It's nothing. I'm tired." Then he disappeared into the bedroom. That night should have been my wake-up call, but it wasn't. I was too wrapped up in my own selfishness to realize the damage I had already done. Instead, I convinced myself that this was my chance to finally get what I thought I deserved. I didn't care how much it was going to hurt him. The very next day, I went straight into Tom's arms. Tom was my boss, tall, muscular, and smooth-talking. He was everything I thought I wanted in a man, the complete opposite of Daniel. He made me feel small and feminine in ways my husband never did, and I was more than willing to throw myself at him. We were intimate in his office that morning, and that was just the beginning. Tom was the first man I cheated on Daniel with, but he wasn't the last. Once I crossed that line, it became easier and easier to keep going. I started going out with my coworkers on Fridays, hitting bars, drinking too much, and waking up the next morning in the arms of strangers. I had become someone I didn't even recognize. I knew deep down I was hurting Daniel, but I told myself he'd get over it, that it was just a phase. I figured I'd get tired of it eventually, and we'd go back to normal. But I didn't understand the price I was paying until it was too late. I wasn't just playing around, I was destroying the man who had loved me more than anyone ever would. And the worst part? I didn't even care enough to stop. 2 months after it started, I was getting ready for work one morning when Tom showed up at my house. He was supposed to pick me up, and I thought Daniel would have already left for his job like he always did. But that day, Daniel opened the door. I was in the shower when I heard them talking. I couldn't make out the words, but I remember the moment I walked out and heard Daniel joke, "So, you're the guy screwing my wife while I fix the light bulbs." He said it so casually, with that same calm expression he always wore. You could never tell what Daniel was feeling. he didn't show anger, disappointment, or sadness. But the weight of that joke hit me hard. I thought he was okay with everything, that maybe he had come around to the idea of an open marriage. It never crossed my mind that he might be completely broken on the inside. On our way to the office that day, Tom laughed about Daniel's reaction. He made jokes about how well my husband seemed to be taking the open marriage and even suggested that Daniel might be into the idea of watching us together. It was disgusting, but at the time, I laughed along. I had become so numb to the reality of what I was doing. I had convinced myself that Daniel didn't care, that he'd accepted this new version of our relationship. That Friday, instead of going out with my coworkers like I usually did, I booked a hotel room with Tom. It had big glass windows with a view of the city's nightlife, and we spent the night there together. The next morning, I came home, and for the first time, something felt wrong. The house was eerily quiet. Daniel and I never worked on Saturdays, and he always spent his mornings playing music, blasting his favorite songs. Even if I came home late or not at all, I'd wake up to the sound of music vibrating through the walls. But that morning, there was nothing. I walked through the house, expecting to find him in our home gym, but he wasn't there. I checked the kitchen, and while his favorite coffee cup was sitting on the counter, it was empty. I smiled at the thought that at least something was normal, but when I opened the cup, I found an envelope. Inside was a letter. I can't remember every word, but the message was clear enough. He was gone. Daniel's letter cut deeper than I could have ever imagined. He told me that by the time I was reading it, he would already be on a flight to South Africa for a 5-year work program. The same program he had mentioned weeks ago, but I never cared to listen. In the letter, he reminded me that I had chosen to open our marriage, and now he was choosing to walk away. At the bottom of the cup, under the letter, was his wedding ring. I felt like my entire world collapsed in that moment. He ended the letter with a note that haunts me to this day: "When I get back, we'll finalize the divorce." I hope Tom's dick, and the others, were worth it. I spent the rest of the day staring at that cup, unable to move, eat, or drink. Everything I had been telling myself, all the lies I used to justify my actions, shattered right there in front of me. I realized I had lost the best man I'd ever have because I wanted to chase some cheap thrill. I had destroyed everything. What followed was a year of complete misery. The day after Daniel left, Tom's best friend, Elias, showed up to collect all of Tom's things. I cried the whole time, watching as they packed up everything, but Elias didn't care. He was furious with me. At one point, he snapped and said, "Stan told me what you did. You're a disgrace to women everywhere, and I hope you regret this for the rest of your life." His words stung, but I knew they were true. I had become the very thing people despised, a selfish, unfaithful wife who threw away her marriage for nothing. After Elias left with Tom's things, I was completely alone. The house felt cold, empty, and lifeless, just like me. I spent days in the same clothes, barely eating, barely moving, just consumed by regret. A few days later, Elias came back, and this time he wasn't here to be nice. I had kept one of Tom's hoodies and some of his colognes, hoping they'd give me some comfort, but Elias wasn't having it. He practically ripped the hoodie out of my hands and grabbed the colognes too. Before he left, he looked at me with nothing but disgust in his eyes. "If it weren't for the laws of this country, I'd spit in your face," he said coldly. "Look around at this empty house, that's what your life's going to be like from now on. Sad and empty." As much as his words stung, they were more true than I wanted to admit. The house that used to be full of love and laughter now felt like a graveyard of my marriage. And just like Elias said, my life started to mirror that emptiness. I tried to distract myself, but nothing worked. I threw myself into meaningless flings with other men, trying to numb the pain, but each time only made me feel worse. It was like I was punishing myself, trying to fill the void Daniel left, but nothing and no one could. I kept hoping Tom would stay, that maybe we could at least build something out of the mess I created. But less than a week after Daniel left, Tom requested a transfer. He wanted nothing more to do with me. When I asked him why he was leaving, his answer was blunt: "I've had my fun." Time to move on. He even had the nerve to suggest I should try to fix things with Daniel before it was too late. Little did he know, it already was. With Tom gone and Daniel out of my life, everything began to crumble. My new boss was strict, and unlike Tom, he wasn't interested in me at all. It didn't take long for my mistakes at work to catch up with me. I was unstable, constantly distracted by the mess I had made of my personal life, and before I knew it, I was fired. That was the beginning of the end. My parents, deeply religious and embarrassed by my actions, disowned me. They couldn't bear the shame I had brought to our family, especially since they were both ministers at our church. I became a complete outcast, with no family, no job, no friends. And Daniel? He never looked back. I waited, keeping my phone number the same, hoping he'd reach out. The 5 years he mentioned in his letter came and went, but there was nothing. No word from him. I tried to reach out to Elias, thinking maybe he'd give me some news, but I found out he had moved to South Africa to join Daniel. As time passed, I lost more and more people. It finally hit me that most of my friends were only around because they adored Daniel. Without him, I was just nobody. I wasn't funny, I wasn't kind, and I wasn't someone people wanted to be around. I realized that the only thing I had going for me was being Daniel's wife. Without him, I was nothing. Now, almost a decade later, I'm still alone. I've tried dating, but as soon as men find out what I did to my husband, they disappear. No one wants to be with the woman who broke the heart of a good man just to sleep around. Every relationship I've had ends the same way, me, sitting alone, wondering how I became this person. It's been nearly 10 years now, and I still live in the same house Daniel and I bought together. It's a small bungalow, the kind of place perfect for a small family. But instead of children and laughter, it's filled with memories and silence. Every corner of this house reminds me of him and what I destroyed. I keep telling myself I need to move on, but no matter how hard I try, I just can't. I never found anyone who treated me the way Daniel did. I never found anyone who loved me even half as much as he did. And it's not just about love, it's about respect. Daniel respected me, trusted me, and valued me in a way no one else has. Now, every time I look in the mirror, all I see is a woman who threw that away for nothing. After Daniel left, my dating life became a disaster. Every time I met someone new, things would start off fine. But eventually, the truth would come out. They'd ask about my past, about why I was divorced, and I'd have to tell them the story. The moment I did, I could see the light leave their eyes. They'd look at me like I was some kind of monster, and maybe they were right. I mean, who does that? Who tells the man who loves them more than anything that they want to sleep with other men? Who destroys their marriage just because they're curious about what else is out there? I thought I was being bold, independent, standing up for what I wanted. But really, I was just selfish, immature, and short-sighted. Now, I'm stuck in this house, reliving the same mistakes over and over again. I can't even afford therapy to help me get out of this mess because I've been unemployed for years. After losing my job, I bounced around from place to place, but nothing ever stuck. I'm a mess, financially, emotionally, and mentally. Sometimes, I still hope I'll see Daniel again. I fantasize about running into him on the street, apologizing for everything, begging him to forgive me. I tell him how sorry I am, how much I regret hurting him. I tell him I never moved on, that even though 10 years have passed, I still love him. But deep down, I know it's too late. He's probably found someone new by now, someone who actually deserves him. Someone who didn't take him for granted. I've come to accept that I ruined the only good thing I'll ever have, and no matter how much I want to, I can't turn back time. A couple of months ago, something unexpected happened. Daniel called me. After almost 10 years of complete silence, hearing his voice again felt surreal. That deep, raspy voice that used to vibrate through my entire body. I never thought I'd hear it again. We ended up talking for hours, and I couldn't stop myself from crying. I told him everything about how miserable I'd been since he left, how much I regretted what I did. I thought about all the ways I hurt him, and hearing him say it out loud only made the guilt sink deeper. He told me how shocked he was when I first brought up opening the marriage, how he couldn't believe I would even suggest something like that. At first, he thought it was one of my late April Fool's jokes, but once he realized I was serious, he said something inside him died that day. He admitted that staying with me during those final months broke him completely. He felt like a fool for hanging around, hoping I'd change my mind, while I just kept pushing for something that destroyed everything we had. When I asked him why he didn't come back after those 5 years in South Africa, his answer gutted me. He said it took him all that time just to get over me, to start feeling happy again. By the time the program ended, he didn't want to see me or risk losing the peace he had finally found. I could hear in his voice how much I had hurt him, how my actions shattered the trust we once shared. And I cried even more because I realized he would never look at me the same way again. Still, we reminisced about the good times, and for a moment, it felt like we were back in those happy days. But it didn't last. He told me he was coming back to the U.S. for a visit, and when I heard that, a small part of me hoped we could rebuild something. But when he came to see me, reality hit hard. He wasn't here to reconnect. He came to drop off the divorce papers. I watched him walk through the house we once shared, his eyes scanning the empty rooms, the spaces that once held our life together. When he saw the cup on the counter, the one where I'd found his letter and wedding ring, he just shook his head. I could see the pity in his eyes, and for the first time, I realized how broken I must have looked to him. He asked me about Tom, referring to him as the tall, ugly buff man, and I had to tell him the truth. I explained how Tom had used me for a couple of months before leaving me behind like I was nothing. Daniel just sighed, shook his head again, and said, "So, 2 months of sex was worth throwing away a 7-year relationship?" I wanted to say no, to take it all back, but it was too late. I told him that no man had ever treated me the way he did, not even Tom. No one came close to knowing me the way Daniel had, and it hurt to admit that I had thrown away something far better than what I was chasing. In that moment, I knew it was over for good. Daniel had moved on, and I was the one left clinging to the past. After our conversation, Daniel offered me something I never expected. He said he'd pay for me to get therapy. I was stunned. Even after everything I had done, after all the pain I put him through, he still cared enough to try to help me. That's the kind of man he is. He had every right to walk out of my life forever, to leave me drowning in the mess I created, but instead, he showed me kindness. He told me he had moved on, and that I deserved to move on too. Hearing those words was like a punch to the gut. I always held on to this fantasy that maybe one day we'd fix things, that he'd come back and we could start over. But in that moment, I knew it was truly over. He had built a new life for himself, one that didn't include me. And I had no one to blame but myself. He left the house that day, and for the first time, I didn't just feel regret, I felt a deep, crushing sense of loss that I couldn't escape from. As much as I hated myself for what I did, I hated even more that I let the only man who ever really cared about me slip through my fingers. We finalized the divorce shortly after, and just like he promised, Daniel paid for my therapy sessions. I'm a month in now, and I can already feel the weight of my past slowly starting to lift. It's not easy, and there are days when I still feel like I'm drowning in regret, but I know I have to keep going. I owe it to myself to try to be a better person, even if it's too late for Daniel and me. I think back to all the times he made me feel like I was the center of his world, like everything he did was for me. I didn't deserve that kind of love, and yet he gave it freely. I've spent so many years punishing myself for what I did, but now it's time to let go and start healing. I don't know if I'll ever fully move on from Daniel. A part of me will always love him, and a part of me will always feel the sting of losing him. But I have to accept that our story is over, that the life I once dreamed of with him is gone. It's time for me to focus on picking up the pieces of my own shattered life and finding a way forward. I'm grateful for what he's done, even now. He could have left me in ruin, but instead, he gave me one last gift, hope. It's funny how it took losing him to realize what I had all along, but now I know. I can never undo the past, but at least I can try to build a better future, even if it's without him. As I move through therapy, I'm starting to understand just how deeply my selfishness ran. I spent years chasing thrills, thinking I deserved more, when the truth was I had everything I could ever want with Daniel. My therapist says I need to stop beating myself up for what happened, but that's easier said than done. I can't help but replay all the moments where I could have done things differently, where I should have listened to Daniel, where I should have appreciated him. I still live in the house we bought together, and every day I'm surrounded by the ghost of our marriage. The emptiness of the rooms is a constant reminder of what I lost. Sometimes, I sit in what used to be our bedroom and imagine what life would have been like if I hadn't pushed him away. I think about the family we could have had, the life we could have built together. But that's all it is now, an empty fantasy. My dating life is non-existent. I've tried, but no matter what I do, the story of my failed marriage always comes up, and once it does, the men I meet lose interest. I don't blame them. Who wants to be with a woman who destroyed her marriage because she wanted to sleep with other men? No matter how much I've changed or how much I regret what I did, that part of my past will always hang over me like a shadow. I'm 36 now, and it feels like my life has been stuck in place ever since Daniel left. The world kept moving, but I didn't. I kept waiting for something, closure, forgiveness, a second chance, but none of that came. Daniel's moved on with his life, and here I am, still picking up the pieces of mine. I don't know if I'll ever find someone who loves me the way he did. To be honest, I'm not sure I deserve it. I spent so many years taking Daniel for granted, and now I'm left with nothing but regret. My friends are gone, my family disowned me, and I've lost touch with the person I used to be. The only thing I have left are the memories, and they're more painful than comforting. But therapy is helping, even if just a little. For the first time in a long while, I'm beginning to believe that maybe there's a future for me, even if it's not the one I wanted. I know I have a long way to go before I can fully forgive myself, but I'm trying. Daniel's kindness in paying for my therapy feels like the final act of love he gave me, even after I destroyed everything. It's like he's giving me a chance to rebuild my life, even though he won't be part of it. Maybe one day, I'll be able to let go of the guilt, to forgive myself for losing the best thing I ever had. But for now, I'm just trying to get through each day without sinking back into the depression that consumed me for so long. Now that the divorce is finalized and I'm months into therapy, I'm slowly coming to terms with the reality of my situation. It took losing everything, Daniel, my friends, my family, even my job, for me to realize the true cost of my actions. The selfishness, the recklessness, it all caught up with me, and now I'm left to deal with the consequences. There's a part of me that still hopes for some kind of redemption. Maybe one day I'll meet someone who can see beyond my mistakes, someone who will give me a second chance at love. But I'm not naive anymore. I know that what I had with Daniel was rare, and it's not something I'll find again easily, if at all. I think about him often, even though I know he's moved on. I imagine him living a happy life somewhere, with a woman who appreciates him the way I should have. Sometimes, I torture myself by wondering if he's married again, if he started the family we once talked about. I wonder if he's happier now without me, and deep down, I know the answer is yes. The house is still the same, and sometimes I catch myself staring at the cup where I found his letter and wedding ring, as if somehow, it holds all the answers I've been searching for. I still haven't brought myself to throw it away. It's the last physical reminder of our marriage, and as much as it hurts, I can't let go of it. Maybe one day I'll be able to, but not yet. Looking back, I see how blind I was. I was so obsessed with the idea of having more, of experiencing something new, that I didn't realize I was already living the dream most people could only hope for. Daniel wasn't just a good man, he was the best man I'll ever know. And I threw him away like he was nothing. But I can't keep living in the past. I've made peace with the fact that I'll never have Daniel back, and while the pain of that realization is overwhelming at times, it's also necessary. I need to let him go. Holding on to this idea of us reconciling is only keeping me trapped in this miserable cycle. I'll never be able to move forward if I don't let go of the past. So, I'm focusing on myself now. The therapy is helping, and I'm starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, I can rebuild my life. It won't be the life I imagined, and it certainly won't be with the man I thought I'd spend forever with. But it can be something new, something that's mine. To anyone who's reading this, I hope you take my story as a warning. If you have someone who loves you, someone who treats you right, don't throw it away because of some fleeting desire. Don't make the same mistake I did. The grass isn't always greener on the other side. Sometimes, it's just an illusion, and by the time you realize it, it's too late. As for me, I'm still a work in progress. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know one thing: I'll never make the same mistake again. I'm learning to live with the regret, and I'm trying to forgive myself, even though it feels impossible most days. I may never fully heal from this, but at least I'm trying. And that's all I can do.